Today, we're going to be talking about finding the right spouse and discipling our children how to find the right spouse with our special guest, Dr. Jeff and his wife, Debbie Schreve. Stay tuned.
You definitely don't want to miss it. You're listening to Marriage Mania, where we are audacious, sagacious, and tenacious for the Lord to uphold godly marriages and to raise fervent children who are countercultural and stand for biblical truth.
Today, we have the honor and blessing to have Dr. Jeff Schreve, who is the pastor of First Baptist Church in Texarkana, Texas, and the founder of From His Heart Ministries, a national and international radio, television, and digital ministry. He is the host of Real Truth for Today, a live weekday radio program on American Family Radio. Pastor Jeff Schreve and Debbie have been happily married since 1986 and frequently speak on marriage and family issues. They have been blessed with 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren. We are absolutely blessed to have you today. Thank you so much, Pastor
amazing.
Jeff and Debbie. Just honored, very honored. Thank you so much for being here today. So tell our audience who you are. Tell us about you.
Well, we appreciate you guys having us. It's an honor for us to be here. And so, Debbie and I got married. We met at church, got married in 1986, March 15th, 1986. So we just celebrated 38 years of marriage. And
man, it went by fast.
Went by fast. Three beautiful daughters, and then the 4 grandchildren, 2 girls, and then we got 2 boys. Finally had boys in the family 2.5 years ago when Jack was born. And so the Lord has blessed. We've been in Texarkana now for 21 years as pastor at First Baptist Church. And we started From His Heart Ministries. This is our 20th year with From His Heart. We started at the end of 2004. And God has blessed that. And then just doing the radio with American Family Radio, having the daily program, that's been it's been fun, but it's been hard because it's every day. As you guys know, doing this, it's, when you have to do that every day and live, that can be a challenge, but it's been really, really good. And so the Lord has really blessed, and we give him all the praise for that.
Yeah. And I want to say too, I've been listening to you probably for the last 13 years. And it's so awesome to hear you on the radio and just listen to you guys daily. I know it's a lot of work, so I appreciate it. I know we do.
Oh yeah. Pastor Jeff Schreve and Debbie, I certainly can't tell you how honored we are to have you on our podcast. You guys have done and are doing some powerful things for the kingdom. Pastor, teacher, leader, leading a large church, writing books, radio spots, podcasts, TV. I don't know how you do all that. In addition to this, you have a strong focus on marriage and family, and both of you make a powerful team in this area. You speak at family life conferences and with American Family Association. We listen to you on the radio all the time, and we've seen you in person at family conferences. We got to talk to you briefly there. You're so personable, and we thank you for all that you do. And we just love your marriage series, The Divine Design, God's Plan for Marriage and Family. And I listen to every episode, and you have a pre-marriage booklet before you say I do. That we encourage anybody that's exploring marriage to get a copy of. And I especially liked your teaching entitled How to Find a Good Thing, about finding a good spouse, the right spouse. And today we wanted to talk about how to find the right person to marry and how to disciple our children to find the right person to marry, which is so crucial because you're linked together for life. Even if you get a divorce, if you have kids, you are linked together for life. So you want to find a good person to partner with. And I love Proverbs 31, which starts off with the important question, who can find a virtuous wife? A wife full of virtues, excellence, for her worth is far above rubies. A virtuous wife is priceless. That question is aimed at husbands who did most of the picking of spouses at the time. But I think that question can apply to any person today, a man or woman, who is looking for a spouse, because the advice applies to both. How can we find a virtuous spouse, full of virtues, full of excellence, not perfect, because none of us are perfect, but someone who is pursuing Jesus with all their heart and chock full of awesome qualities that is a blessing to us and our family to be a powerful partnership for God's kingdom. Proverbs 31 speaks a lot of these virtues to look for in a spouse and gives us great guidance in this area. But I first wanted to ask the more existential question, and that's why? Why is it important to find a good spouse? And why is how to find a good spouse an important discussion to have with our children? Does it make a difference who we choose to marry? Does that process of picking a good spouse make a difference?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it makes a huge difference in life. You're gonna if you approach marriage as the way God intended, that it's one man, one woman for life. You're going to be with this person for the rest of your life. And Debbie and I, early on, we said divorce is not an option. So whatever obstacles we hit, we do that together.
He said early on, if I ever left him, he was going with me. Yeah. So we're stuck together.
Yeah, so you don't want to, you want to do your homework when you choose a spouse and make sure you, just like if you were going to buy a car, you'd be very unwise to just go to the lot and just whatever, you don't check them out. You don't know anything of the consumer reports. You can buy a lemon if you just, boom, you just do that. So you want to have done your homework, and this, in even a much greater way, when it comes to choosing your life partner, you need to do your homework. You need to find out about this person. A perfect person doesn't exist, but you need to, as you said, Michael, you need to find a virtuous person, a quality person, a person who really loves the Lord and walks with the Lord and is desiring to grow in his or her relationship with Jesus.
Well, and I think too, outside of your relationship with Christ, which is the most important relationship, that vertical relationship that you can have. But when you start looking at horizontal relationships, your marriage relationship is the most important foundational one that you have horizontally. And so it behooves you to make a wise choice. And particularly in our culture today, where marriage is so devalued, it is seen as something that could just be dismissed and discarded so easily. It's being redefined on every different level. It's so important that we teach our children how God defines marriage and why it is so important, because it's a representation, an earthly representation of his relationship with the church and with the bride of Christ.
Yes.
Oh yes, that's so good and such great wisdom. It makes me think a lot of anguish can happen in a marriage because of a poor choice. I think I heard that on your
Right.
teaching. None of us are perfect, as we said, but we can choose someone who is either full of virtues, or we can pick someone who has a lot of growing to do, or is not growing, which is a big problem.
Well, it's kind of like this, Michael. So, they have those things called Carfax, where you can find out if a car's been in a flood or something like that, on a used car. I tell people this. I say, now listen, if you buy a person, in terms of buying, but if you marry a person that has a ton of emotional baggage, you just need to know going into it, this person's been through a flood. This engine has been damaged. And if you want to deal with that, and if she hasn't worked through the baggage, then you're going to have to work through it with her. My attitude toward it was, I don't want to do that. I don't want to find somebody that's a reclamation job. I want to find somebody that has dealt with things, and it's not going to be just this drama all the time. Because most guys, as you know, Michael, most guys don't like to do the drama. And if coming home every day is just this big crisis of one after another, after another, after another, that's very hard to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think, discipleship is key. Nothing better than for two disciples of the Lord that get married, that just are real big on personal growth, that continuous sanctification process where God is refining us. And that's so important in marriage, because marriage is a team, and we want to have a strong team. That makes me think of like sports teams. A lot of what makes a team great is getting the best personnel on the field. Some of your best coaches are your best recruiters, getting the best players on your team. It's same with organizations. The classic book, Good to Great, their research found that the great companies are good people in their organizations as their prime objective. They find and keep good people. If you have to create a position, just get good people on board. That's the biggest recipe for success. And then church history bears this out. There are two great people in church history who are a testament to this. We talk a lot about church history in our family Bible time, and we recently learned about John Wesley and John Calvin and their marriages. They had two opposite experiences in their marriages. Great giants in the faith, where we can learn from their strengths and their weaknesses. John Wesley, a great circuit rider, revival preacher in the Great Awakening in the 1700s, I'm sure y'all know. As a single adult, he had a habit of falling in love with the nurses that cared for him when he was sick. 3 separate times this happened. The first 2 didn't work out. His brother Charles actually broke up the second one by telling the nurse to leave. I think he was starting to notice a pattern. But John Wesley married the third nurse that cared for him. Within a week of meeting her, they were married within a week. And the marriage was rocky by all historical accounts. They spent much of their marriage separated, which is the opposite of that was John Calvin. He was a leader in the Reformation in the 1500s and was single for a while before determining to marry. And he set out on a purpose to find a wife. And he let his strong Reformation colleagues know he was looking for a wife and elicited their help. And he gave them some qualities he was looking for. He said, I want a wife that is chaste, obliging, kind, helpful, a servant heart, not fastidious, not picky, not unkind or disagreeable, economical, careful not to waste money or resources, patient, and someone that would care for him, a strong helper. And after a couple of suggestions that didn't create a spark, it was fellow laborer Martin Bucer who suggested idole de Bure. Pardon my poor French there, but a widow that was in Calvin's congregation, and she turned out to be an excellent wife with great virtues, according to Calvin and others who spoke of their marriage. In Calvin's letters, he described her as a fellow laborer in his ministry. And when she died an untimely death to illness, he wrote to his friends and colleagues, I do what I can to keep myself from being overwhelmed with grief. I've been bereaved of the best companion of my life. And he never married again because he said no one could replace her. But here's the question, Pastor Jeff and Debbie. Calvin told his friends some qualities he was looking for in a spouse. What are some qualities we should look for in a spouse?
Yeah, I would say number one, it's somebody that loves the Lord and is passionate about pursuing Jesus. If you don't have that, then that relationship is not going to be built on Christ. So that's number one. And we've experienced that in our own family with one of our daughters marrying a guy that wasn't passionate about Jesus, and it didn't do well. So it has to be somebody that's grounded in the Lord, and that is my desire. So Psalm 127 verse 1, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. But you can have a guy that's really good. You know, we had 3 daughters, so you can have a guy that loves the Lord and pursuing the Lord, but maybe he doesn't have a good work ethic. Maybe he doesn't wear well, and he's got this job for 6 months and this job for a year, and he's just bouncing around all the time. There's not a lot of stability. That would be a big red flag to me. What kind of a father is he going to be? What did he have modeled before him? You can have guys from bad backgrounds, girls from terrible backgrounds, and have you addressed the baggage? That's the big thing about the Carfax. Have you dealt with your past? Because if you go into marriage and you just shoved all that stuff into the closet, it's coming out when you get married, and it's going to be like, good night, I didn't know it was all this. And so I think that's another critical thing. Has that person dealt with things, hurts from their past, to where they're at a healthy spot?
Well, I think, too, you don't want to be so much alike in your temperaments and in your personalities, because then there's no challenge there. There's no excitement there. If I wanted to be just with me all the time, I wouldn't need anybody else, right? But you also don't want to have it at such a point where you're so opposite that you just clash on almost everything. And our middle daughter, when she was dating her husband, they went through this book, and I can't remember the author's name, but it was 100 questions to ask your fiance before you get married. And so it just went through all these different things, and it just spawned conversation between them to kind of talk about what your goals are in life, what your values are in life, what kind of deep-seated character traits do you have, good and bad? Am I willing to deal with the bad ones, And so I think that's so critically important, because we talk about in counseling and in speaking that there are things in life that are spine issues, that are non-negotiable issues, and then there are rib issues that are kind of, secondary issues. But on those spine issues, those non-negotiable things in life, you have to see those things eye to eye and be in sync and in step with each other on those things. And if you don't in that dating time, that's a big red flag. And the biggest mistake you can have in life is just barreling through those red flags and not stopping and evaluating and making a decision based on time and prayer about a red flag that's come up in a relationship. So there has to be some interest there in terms of things you're still figuring out about each other, but there has to be those common core spine things that, man, you are in step on those things together.
Yes, that is great sound advice. It kind of, as you're speaking, it kind of reminded me of Proverbs 31, where you're looking for those qualities, and they give a good list of things to. It's not an exhaustive list, I don't think, but it's I think a lesson to kind of get us thinking in that regard of what kind of things to look for in a spouse. Do they have strong character? They exude strength. They have emotional strength and maturity. Like verse 25 talked about, they're clothed in strength and honor, wisdom, kindness. They have kindness. They watch over their household, so they're not distant and pursuing their own thing and neglecting their family, which you guys talked about. They're constantly growing. They can provide for their family. They inspire trust. They look to do good. They work hard. They even rise early to get started. They provide for their household not only physically but emotionally as well by being there for them. And so, I think the point is to have those kind of criteria to be looking out for, is what I'm hearing you say. And I wanted to ask, we want to make sure our standards are high. A lot of problems come when we get impatient and our standards are too low, and we just jump into a relationship with the first person that shows us attention without exploring their character further, without getting the Carfax, as you say. But I wanted to explore the opposite extreme too. Can our standards sometimes be too high at times? Do we need to watch out for that, the opposite extreme, where our standards can sometimes be too high, and the first thing we find a fault in somebody, we discard them as a possibility? Is that something to watch out for?
Yeah, we told our girls that, because it's like, you have to be wise in figuring out what is the deal breaker. So if somebody is, if they have trouble locating their wallet because they're just kind of absent-minded about where they put their wallet, where they put their keys, that's probably not a deal breaker. That might be irritating, but that's not going to be like, I can't marry you. You don't know where you put your wallet. So things like that. And just to know, I mean, we all have faults. I have faults. Debbie has faults. When the strengths greatly outweigh those weaknesses, and if the weaknesses are things that are going to be like, I can't live with that. This is going to be something that's going to drive me crazy from day one. You're probably not going to last over a few dates. And as you guys know, the physical attraction has to be there. If there's no physical attraction, we tell people all the time, don't get married, because you need to have that. But the physical sexual attraction, that can't sustain a marriage very long, because that's exciting, but it's not exciting for 50 years. It doesn't have that same kind of sweaty palms, my heart is racing every time I'm around you. That you start to get into the rhythm of regular life, everyday life, and you have to have something way deeper than just this physical attraction.
Yeah. That's something, and then it slipped away. Go ahead, I'll think of it.
No, I was going to say, I totally agree. And I know when Michael and I were dating, I kind of put him through the ringer, just really wanting to know, like, the primary thing was, do you know the Lord? And not just say yes, but actually, like, are you walking it? And I think that's the important thing too, is to watch and see, like, is this person really doing what they're saying? I know in one of your podcasts, you mentioned, you want to be someone that's doing the action. Like, you don't want to be a hypocrite, just to say, oh yeah, I go to church. Yeah, I know Jesus. Yes. And their life, they're not showing any fruit. And so that's super important. Us having a daughter, we talk about, what are the qualities you want to look in for your spouse, just starting even at a young age is good to talk about that. Cause I know you mentioned one of your daughters had dreamed about, getting married, and she got married very young, because she knew, and she was looking for those qualities. So I think that's so important, for us to be, careful and mindful, when we're discipling our children, or even talking to our friends that may be single, to help them. Hey, let's make sure you're not just looking for that physical attraction, let's make sure that, you're looking that this person loves Jesus. Everything that you said is just spot on.
Yeah.
And then back to your initial question, I think if people put such a high standard that no one can meet it, even then, I mean, they can't meet their own standard, right? Because they're a sinner just like everybody else is. So I think so often when people do have those standards that are set unreasonably high, it's probably due to some kind of struggle that they may have with commitment within themselves from some hurts from their past. And so that's a time that needs to be evaluated, and some things that need to be evaluated. And you have to surrender that to the Lord and to his leadership. If he's leading you to someone, you need to pursue that, until he shuts that door. But you can't have a standard that's so high that no one can meet it. I mean, that's not reasonable.
I counseled a couple that was getting married, and she had gotten burned in her first marriage, and so her standards and her sensitivity level was really high. And I just sensed as I was talking to them, this is not going to work, because that you're not marrying a perfect person. That guy is going to hurt your feelings. He is going to let you down because he's human. And if you hold him to this standard, he's never going to be able to meet that. And so you can't go into marriage like, hey, you have to be a 10 every single day in your walk with the Lord. Well, nobody is. And so, we all have people to play. So you have to be, what does it take to have a good marriage? You have to be a good forgiver, and you have to be humble enough to confess and say, hey, I messed up. Would you please forgive me? So you have to be good at seeking forgiveness and granting forgiveness, and then you work it out. So I know Debbie has a good heart for the Lord and for me, and so I always give her the benefit of the doubt. If she does something that hurts my feelings, I know that didn't come from a malicious, I'm trying to hurt you attitude and point of view. And she knows that with me. So do we hurt each other's feelings? Yes. But we know we didn't do that on purpose. And so we can get that rectified pretty quickly.
Yeah, but I like what you're saying, because it's, we need to examine our standards from both angles. Are they too high or are they too low? Could only
Right.
Jesus measure up to our expectations? We're not going to find another Jesus. We need to find somebody who is pursuing Jesus with all their heart. But we're all sinners in need of Jesus. Marriage is the union of two broken people with flaws. So how do we know if the flaws are deal breakers to the degree that I don't want to consider this person for a spouse? And I like what you say, where, the biggest deal breaker is if they're not pursuing Jesus. And I like your emphasis on pursuing. It's not just, I go to church, saying those kind of things. Do we see real fruit from it? Do they just seem to just be in love with Jesus, and they're following the Holy Spirit, and the Word of God is just informing their every decision? And I like where you add that it's not just pursuing Jesus or saying you're pursuing Jesus, but also watch for a character. Signs like Proverbs 31 mentions character things, and do they have character that reflects that they're pursuing Jesus? And big red flags to me, I would think, would be like addiction, anger issues, conflict resolution issues. You mentioned in your talk, Pastor Schreve, about a guy who threw something through a window, and it's like, it looked like they might have some anger issues. Is that somebody you want to kind of link your life with? Are they lying, cheating, or stealing, or like the examining your feelings are infatuation, like with John Wesley. It's our natural tendency is to have some feelings for someone who shows us attention. And, we got to make sure that that's not just some kind of infatuation, and Wesley didn't seem to have a process for finding a spouse. He seemed to quickly marry an infatuation. Calvin had a process. He was intentional about finding a good spouse. What are the best ways to look for a spouse if you're looking?
Well, we would tell couples this all the time. You need to be active in your local church. You need to be serving, and you need to be walking with the Lord. As you are walking with the Lord and exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit, you attract somebody to you that is also like that. If you're living a carnal life, you attract someone else that's marginally saved, if saved at all. So it's hard to tell if somebody living a carnal life is even saved. So it's where you are, your associations. Debbie and I met at church. We didn't meet at a nightclub. We didn't meet at a bar. So we were both hey, I'm seeking the Lord, you're seeking the Lord. And so that helps a lot in terms of finding that right person. Environment is pretty critical.
Well, and I had heard from someone, and I don't remember who, but it is you want to be the person that you want to marry. So if I want to marry a godly man, I have to be a godly woman. If I want to marry someone who's emotionally available, is going to be vulnerable with me, I have to be willing to be that way as well. And so you have to work on yourself to become the person that's going to attract the kind of person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. And like if I think about especially people as they're getting older, let's say they're in their mid 30s and they're still not married, you live in a small town, you're not in a metropolitan area. How do you go about finding someone? Well, God's going to bring you the right person, but that doesn't mean you don't have to take some steps. And so we've had multiple couples that we know that have met through a Christian online dating service or different things like that. But it goes back to that screening process, regardless of where you meet someone, to make sure that they line up with the qualifications that you're really seeking after. But God, the word tells us, and Mr. Bible will know the exact reference, but that no good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. So your responsibility is to be walking uprightly. That's your responsibility. And then if someone is a good thing for you, God's not going to withhold that from you. He promised this when you're in fellowship with him. If it's a good thing, he's not going to withhold from you. And so you just have to trust him and trust his timing. And that can be hard when that's really a desire of your heart and his timing is so different than what your timing is. Yours is right now, and that's not his timing. That's really difficult. But that's where the faith and the trust and the surrender, that's where that comes into play.
Yes, that's just great advice. I like that. First of all, work on yourself.
Yes.
Be the right person. Be the person that you want to marry. That's so great. Be that disciple of Jesus who's just pursuing Jesus with all your heart. Then you'll just naturally be steered to looking for someone of the same mindset. And I like how you say put yourself out there. I think in your teaching, Pastor Schreve, you said be out there looking for your Boaz.
Right.
I like the joke that goes along with that though. Find your Boaz, but watch out for his cousins, broke ass, no good ass. but it's so we still have to be discerning when we're looking for our Boaz and watch out for some counterfeits.
Yeah. Now the thing with Ruth, she wasn't looking for anybody. She was just being faithful to her mother-in-law out in the field. Boaz found her. So when we would tell our middle daughter that all the time, Amy, you just be faithful to the Lord. You be faithful to the field that he's given you. Don't go home and just shut the door and then wait for them to call you. You got to get out in the stream of life. And so she did a lot of stuff with the singles group at First Baptist Church in Houston. And that's where she met her husband. It was in one of the single Sunday school classes. And so that wouldn't have happened if she had been a hermit, like so many people are.
Yeah, going where good Christian godly prospects would be is
right,
and meet people and ask people to introduce you to good people of good godly character. And that's what I also love about the story, like you mentioned, of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz in the book of Ruth. Naomi counseled Ruth how to approach Boaz.
Right.
Naomi knew Boaz. It was her relative and knew him to be of good, upstanding character. And she worked to get Ruth and Boaz to get together. And, I think that's a good lesson to get good godly counsel and objective advice to ask, is this a good spouse? Get trusted friends and family to look for a good godly spouse and get friends and family to meet the person you're considering and give their honest opinion and see if they see any red flags, because our eyes may be blind. Go to their family functions and notice how they treat their family and how their family treats them. If there's a lot of discord among them and a bunch of their family members, the common denominator may be them. And that might be something to take notice of. If they don't get along with everybody, they probably won't get along with you either. And, I think we can also pray for God to help us find a spouse. I just remember of Abraham and Isaac is a great example. When they were living in a pagan world, Abraham sent his servant to find a godly spouse among the people that followed the one true God. And the servant prayed for God's help, and he led the servant to Rebecca. And, God wants us to find a godly spouse if he's called us to
Right.
marriage, and he's called most of us to marriage, and he will help us in that endeavor if we ask and trust him. I do want to ask a question. Let me just say this. There's sometimes there's an aspect of this conversation about finding a good spouse that sometimes in the background, it almost kind of rubs me the wrong way, because I feel like I'm being judgmental, like I'm perfect and I'm being critical of others to meet up to my standards. But if there's anywhere area where we need to have a good judgment and have a critical eye, it's when we're looking for a spouse who will be our partner in life. But what about after you're married and now you're having issues and are second guessing your choice in a spouse? What do we do now? Do we keep that same critical eye?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that's important too, we hear this a lot. You're my soulmate. I found my soulmate. Like there's just one person in the world that you could have a happy marriage with. There are lots of people you could probably have a happy marriage with. If you find somebody that you're physically attracted to that loves the Lord, that's walking with the Lord, you could have a good marriage with them. Now, I think one of the things that's key, and Debbie alluded to this, is you have to be different in your personality. So opposites attract, and if you're too much the same, you're going to start to bump heads. So when you're different, then you link together. So Debbie has strengths where I don't, and that's attracts me to her. I have strengths where she doesn't, and so together we're much stronger. So I'm not going to marry somebody that's just like me, as she said, because then that would be, I don't like your weaknesses because they're my weaknesses.
Right.
And you don't bring anything to the table that I don't bring to the table. So I think that's important on the front end, and you can get through lots of other stuff. But everybody has difficulty in marriage, and I think the big thing is, and I was thinking about this as you were talking, Michael. I can't remember a time in our marriage where I was surprised and said, "Wow, I never knew you were like this." Because we spent enough time together to where we knew each other, and so there wasn't any kind of other side. It's not Dr. Jekyll and then Mr. Hyde. It's like, well, I never met Mr. Hyde. I don't like him, because we saw each other getting angry. That's important for couples when they're dating, to see how does he respond to anger, how does she respond to anger, because that reveals a lot about that person. And couples that get married in a week, like John Wesley, you don't have enough time to see that stuff.
Well, I think too, we have an enemy out there who wants to distract us. His mission is to steal, kill, and destroy. And so what he has a tendency to do in marriage is, once you are married, instead of focusing on all the positives that drew you to that person, you start minimizing those and you zoom in big screen and maximize weaknesses. And so you just start focusing on the wrong thing. And that's when you can start to think, man, what have I done? I've made a big mistake, right? And so once you have committed to somebody, the Lord's desire is for you to stay with that person for the rest of your life. And so we talk about this little cross stitch that I made early on in our marriage, and it said, choose your love and love your choice. So you have to go back to those things that you found initially that you loved about that person, start focusing in on those things, and go back to being the person that you want to be, that God wants you to be, and to not let the enemy distract you and get you off course. And there are times, when people come to kind of impasses in their marriage, and they need to be willing to get outside biblically based counseling of someone that can be a third party and help them negotiate maybe a really rough patch of road that they're on. But it's not the marriage necessarily, it's the patch of road. And so to keep that at the forefront.
I love that. Choose your love and then love your choice. Before you're married, be intentional, eyes wide open to choose your love. And then afterwards, shut your eyes. love your choice. Love is blind, so we often get into marriage with our eyes shut to all their flaws and then open them once we're married. And we need to do the exact opposite. We need to have our eyes open when we're looking for a spouse. And then once we're married, we need to shut our eyes to a lot of their flaws. I mean, there's some things it's the glory of a man to overlook an offense,
Right.
the Bible tells us, and have the attitude, like you said, that divorce is not an option. We're always going to work it out no matter how hard it is or how long it takes. There's some very strong research out there that shows that 80% of those who report an unhappy marriage, if they just stick it out, they report their marriages as happy just 5 years later. So I wanted to change a little direction here, but here's a big question for those who have teenagers, and I want to resolve this question before our daughter becomes a teenager, and every day it seems like she's getting closer and closer. But how should Christians date? Should parents steer their children away from dating as much as they can, or should they allow dating at a certain age? But is there a different way that Christians should date? In your teachings, it sounds like you had experience going through this phase of life. What advice do you have for parents in this area?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Things have changed so much.
Yes.
So when our kids were doing that, with our oldest daughter, Jill, Jay, who works at the church and worked at the church the whole time I've been here, he was always at our house. So we got to know him really well. And so much of their dating was done just at our house. Then my middle daughter, she got married last, and she was in her late 20s. And so we weren't involved
in another city.
Yeah, we weren't involved in any of that. So I think when they're young, you have to monitor where they're going, because as Debbie says all the time, what keeps you pure? Location, location, location.
It's all about geography.
You can't put yourself in a situation where you're parking, you're going to be, hey, my parents are out of town, why don't you come over? You're alone, and that just sets the stage for bad things to happen. And so I think a lot of dating needs to be done probably more in double dates, in hey, you come to the house and you guys are in the living room or whatever, we'll be in the den, and there's just there's accountability there.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And as your kids get older, you're not going to have that same level of control. And so you have to have instilled in them character and then wise decision making. They have to have come to the conclusion of what their moral standards are going to be, because as much as we want to enforce those on them, when they move away, we can't control that anymore. And so I think it really does depend on where in the age process they are, and not even a numeric age, but a maturity level that they have. But dating is completely different in this current culture than it was even a decade ago when ours were dating. I mean, it's just different.
Yeah, I've heard the culture's approach to dating is largely a hookup culture. Let's just play around and have a good time. You have to be very careful that you're not dating someone that has that same mindset, and that even goes for Mr. and Mrs. Clean Cut Christian. You never know what kind of sensual desires can lurk behind a clean cut package. And I think Christians should wholly reject this approach to dating, just having fun with the opposite sex that is aimless and pleasure seeking without a bunch of, with a bunch of breakups and lack of commitment. I think dating should be for a purpose, and that purpose is to find a spouse. And if you're not ready to find a spouse, I question why date. Maybe hang out with a group of friends, but no one-on-one dating until you are in a position to marry, and then date for a purpose of finding a spouse, finding that Boaz. First be friends and explore whether you can be really good friends, and then if there's a spark, explore whether this friend would make a good spouse. Although there's a part of me that wonders if there's a place for discipling a junior or senior in high school how to date while they still are under our house. And, there are people that end up marrying their high school sweethearts. So, is there a place for dating even before you are able to marry as part of discipling how to date and how to find a good spouse and do it the biblical way, like finding Boaz? It's a difficult issue that parents have to navigate.
Wow, that was amazing to have Pastor Jeff Schreve and his wife Debbie with us. Unfortunately, they had some technical difficulties and it dropped, but we're just so honored that they were able to give us their wisdom about finding a spouse and actually teaching your children and discipling them how to find a spouse. And so I think we were about to end on that last question, Michael. So you may want to just kind of talk through that last question so that our listeners can hear the response to that.
The last question was, how do we initiate these discussions with our children about how to find a good spouse. And, we like the idea of family Bible studies. Take advantage of opportunities when you read through the book of Ruth and Proverbs 31 about the virtuous wife or spouse, or 2 Corinthians 6:14, don't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. When going over these areas of scripture, lean into these discussions and about how to pick a good spouse. Start young. We're having these discussions with our 7-year-old daughter. The younger you can instill this mindset, the better. We also go through a book that has really quick lessons on church history, and there's some really good examples in church history that can initiate discussions about finding a good spouse, like with Wesley and Calvin, and there are others. Don't miss an opportunity to have an ongoing conversation about picking a godly spouse that pursues Jesus. It's crucial to their walk with the Lord to pick a godly spouse, to pick someone who will support their walk and disciple their children together to be passionate Jesus followers.
Yeah, amazing. And there's so many nuggets of what Pastor Jeff and Debbie gave us that are just great examples of really looking for that spouse who loves the Lord, doesn't just say they love the Lord, but actually walks, and there's fruit that's reflecting from their walk. And ask for counsel, ask friends to help you to discern if this is the right person. And just looking at those qualities, like we talked about, I think that's so important, because you don't want to be married to someone or about to marry someone that it just is not going to work out. It's going to be something that's going to break your heart, and it's just going to bring you so much sorrow and trouble. So it's really important to be discerning. It's really important to be prayerful. And it's important for you to also seek the Lord as you're seeking for your spouse. So like what Debbie said, if you want that godly spouse, you need to be that godly spouse. And so that's a great piece of advice and wisdom from the Schreves. And we're just so blessed that they were able to be here. And we have a podcast every Tuesday that we put out for marriage and family and discipling our children, where we go through Christian history or talk about how we can best disciple our children. And we're just so happy and honored again to be able to share this information and talk with a well-known pastor who really loves the Lord, and it reflects in his teaching and it reflects in his character as we met him face to face. Just a very great person in the Lord. And so again, we're very honored. But thank you so much for being here, and until next time.
God bless.